Welcome back. I'm Bill. This is a Coleman Model 2E camp stove, or perhaps I should say it's what's left of a Coleman Model 2E camp stove. I've had this for probably about 8 years. I got it in a whack of stuff that I traded with another collector, and I haven't been quite sure what to do with it. My original plan was to restore it fairly quickly, and then I discovered that the tank was full of pinholes. Folks, don't sandblast your tanks. Whoever had this before the guy I got it from had stripped off all of the valuable parts and sandblasted it. So the stove body, the oven, all of that seemed to be in pretty good shape. Everything looks straight. There are a few little pieces bent here and there, but nothing significant, which is really nice. And I guess the sandblasting has made it almost ready to just paint. But it also had some ill effects. As I quickly discovered, I managed to come up with some parts to get the tank sealed. It's missing a pump, it's missing a fuel cap, and I took care of those and got it pumped up, and it hissed like crazy, and I started looking, and it's got pinholes all over the place. So that's the downside of sandblasting things sometimes. It's missing a fair number of pieces in here. I've made my own cover for the mixing chamber, but it's missing the burner caps, the screws, it's missing the generator. It's just missing too much. And of course the sandblasting process messed up other things. It took the nickel plating off the grate, it took the nickel plating off the legs. Yeah, don't sandblast stuff. So I've just had this sitting around for years, like I said. And recently I acquired a 9E. I already have a 9E. In fact, I'll show you. The 9E is exactly the same. It just doesn't have the oven built in. This is what a 9E looks like with lots of patina. This is mine. It's brown. And so recently I acquired another 9E that has been painted green, but it has a good tank, and it's got virtually all of the pieces that are missing from this one, so it's going to be a donor. I will be taking the tank off of it. It's got legs that still seem to have the nickel plating intact under the green paint. The grate still has at least some of the nickel plating on it, so I'm going to be using that for donor parts on this, because this is nice and straight and it's got the oven. So what can I tell you about the E series of stoves? They were made in the US between approximately 1931 and 1933, so for several years, which means there are a fair number of them out there. They're not that hard to find. After the E series, the rarity begins to increase dramatically. After that, they started coming out with a new revision every year. So the F's in 34, and the G's in 35, and the H in 36, the B in 37, and so on. Those get a lot more difficult to find. Also in the 30s, their product line began to diversify a lot more. So there were other models competing for sales. So the 2s and the 9s start to drop off in their in the ease of finding them. This was the first model stove that Coleman made that had the instant lighting feature. If you look at the older stoves, they always have a preheat cup. In fact, this actually has a preheat cup on it, so I'm assuming they were perhaps designing this to be non-instant lighting originally, and then added the technology without actually changing the manifold. But this has 2 valve knobs. I should get out the other tank here so you can see it, and I'll swap them out. There we go. So this has 2 knobs, you might notice, or you might not, because it's only in theory on this, because we're missing a knob here. This knob turns on the fuel, It has an instant lighting air, fuel and air tube that goes way down into the tank, and this is stuck, and I don't want to break the valve stem. So you turn this a quarter of a turn, just like you would on any other instant lighting stove or lantern, and then you open the valve or the generator control here in order to light it. Once it's running and the flame is burning blue, then you come back here and you open the main valve all the way, and then you control the flame level here. The reason this is lacking a knob is because someone replaced the E-series generator with an earlier one, which makes it really tempting to take this off and put it on one of my earlier Model 9 stoves that it would belong on. But that's probably did this because those were easier to find and were used on a lot more stoves than the E-series generator was. The E-series actually has a knob here. So this, you can tell someone's missing the original, the key that would have gone with this and was turning it with pliers or something. It's a bit chewed up, but I think we can retrofit this with another stove knob. So this was an instant lighting model. It's still got a lot of the older features. You've still got the tank that's attached to the burners and the manifold and the generator, and to stow it away, pull that in, move everything in, and then you see this notch back here. It mates up with this tab. So we pull that in, angle it down, and then just drop it in like that, and now our tank is stowed. The oven is like that on the D-series. I'm not sure that, I don't think the D-series has two positions. This may have been the first one with two positions on it. And it just folds back into the lid. I thought it would be easier to show you how it folds up rather than how it folds out. So we simply unlock, slide those tabs out, slide these tabs out. This guy actually stores underneath. I'll just put it there for now. And then all we do, unhook the door, all held together with tabs. We fold these sides out. This folds back into the lid, and there we've got the oven all folded away. If we don't want the oven out, oops, take that off. If we don't want the oven in use, we've got windscreens, and this model actually has, if they will come out, there we go. This model has supports for it, and of course we've got a towel rack here, but if this isn't in use, we need to flop it down so that the lid stays in one piece. So that's the Model 2. I think I've covered everything. So I'm going to start taking this apart. The main stove body itself, I'm going to try to drive these pins out because this is going to be a lot easier to paint if I can get all of the oven parts apart. And I'm hoping I can drive them out and there's not a bunch of sand stuck in there keeping that from happening. But in the meantime, let's get to work on this guy. All right, this will be the lion's share of our disassembly here. Take this cap off. This is just a regular 3-piece fuel cap. The generator fits in this channel on the manifold, cross grooves there, and it's just held in place with a screw and this washer. And then we've got a RCAF, I think 417 Squadron helicopter circling around. They do search and rescue, and they're doing training, I think, and it keeps going around and around and around. So if you hear a helicopter, that's what's going on. So this is our generator. This will be the last time you see it in this video. That's going to go on my Model 9. And now at this point, we should have to take this guy off in order to remove the tank. That's held on with a screw, but as I discovered this morning, this bracket was, I think, held on with paint and grease. I looked at it wrong and it came off, so it's a good chance to get that cleaned up well, and I will use JB Weld to put this back on once we've got everything cleaned up. So let's do the manifold first, since this is the easy part. This should have had a slotted screw in it. This is a replacement. And this is the cover for our mixing chamber. The gas comes in from the generator here. The air comes up this way, and they mix in here, and it goes down through the manifold here and then splits and goes to the two burners. We've got our burner caps. I think they call these toothed burners. There's a ring in here that's got some little standoffs, so it sits up from the manifold, and then there's spacers, I guess you could say, and then this has teeth on the bottom so that it's held up. And these would be standard on this, but later they would become typical of like the economy models, whereas the Banda Blue burners with the alternating flat and corrugated rings that you see on modern stoves would be on the deluxe models. These are a little bit oily because I've had penetrating oil on here for about a month now. Sometimes these will come out. There isn't really any pressing need for this to come out, other than if I want to try to clean up this springy thing a bit, but we'll see here and see how this goes. If it doesn't want to come out, we'll leave it. Usually they don't. I'm just going to leave that in. Again, there's no real pressing reason why. I can use a wire wheel on this as it is, and it'll all go in the electrolysis tank. So that's our manifold and burner assembly. Now for the interesting part, the tank, we just take this, I guess it's sort of a riser off. It's got this bit here. This fits in a slot in the front of the case so that all of this is in the right position. These are just sort of, the nipples are held in place by these nuts that are captive. And we'll take the screw out here and our valve disc. I don't know if this is a later one or an earlier one or what. That other tank has an instruction disc as well, but it's different. It just has a thing about a quarter turn, and frankly, to me, it looks like it's more modern. But I'm not sure. I haven't seen that documented anywhere. So go ahead and the whole thing is going to turn. We'll just go ahead and take the whole thing out then. So the fuel comes out here. Our fuel shutoff point is down below this, and just unscrew the nut here. paint in the threads or something. There we go. Oh. All right, so that's our jam nut for their valve stem nut. And you can see this, when we open this, it turns nicely. But this, I can see, is using graphite packing string. I don't want to disturb that. What it is, it's asbestos string impregnated with graphite, and it's all compressed together, and that not only makes this easier to turn, but once that jam nut is on, it also compresses it and keeps fuel from leaking out back this way. And it seems to be in good shape. So normally I would give this a good pull and pull the whole valve stem out, but I don't want to mess with that graphite packing rope if I don't have to. So I'm just going to leave it like this at this point, and we'll clean it up as is. But this is our air wire. So if you think about an instant lighting lantern, there's an air wire that sits in the top of the fuel and air tube and has a little spring under here, under a shoulder, that wants to keep pushing it up. And this, instead, it's a little bit of a different design. It's an earlier instant lighting design, but it's moved in and out. It's screwed into the bottom of the valve stem, and so when you unscrew the valve to open it, it slowly backs the air stem out and allows a free flow of fuel. So we'll just leave that as it is for now. And now the rest of the fuel system is held in place by this ring with the hex on it, and these are usually really tight. Sometimes you have to use an impact wrench on this, but we'll see what I can do with a socket or a ratchet. Okay, we got lucky. So this unscrews. Sometimes the main part will come out with it. Sometimes it'll be stuck in there. It's a little bit like an L220 or L228 with the pickup that sits down in the bung. This is just a really large example of that. But this part pulls out. You can see the fuel pickup goes down at an angle down into the bottom of the tank so that it's picking up the last dregs of fuel. And then you've got to be careful with these when you pull them out, because there's also an air wire on here. And it all just barely fits. So there we go. So that's the last of our tank, and this is the fuel pickup. This goes down into the bottom of the tank, and this is our pickup screen. That already wants to unscrew. Didn't get my second wrench, so boy, there it goes. So this is just a screen, and this keeps any debris that's in the fount from getting sucked up into the fuel system. It's got holes, 4 holes all around it, and then it's covered with a screen, so you can kind of see the holes in there. This needs to be cleaned. Once the fuel gets past that, it runs up through this. Boy, these are all really loose. So the fuel runs up through here, and main tube there. And this bit's kind of interesting. This does have threads. The last one I had, I wasn't successful in unscrewing it, and this one I don't want to put much pressure on it or torque on it because it's brass, and I really don't want to snap that off. But fuel comes in here, goes up here, and then the air feeds in here. So this is sticking down into the bottom of the tank. This sticks up into the air you've pumped into the top of the tank to pressurize it, and there's a little bit that's used for lighting. So The air comes down here. It's limited because it's a small hole through the tube, but then they've also got a wire through the middle of it that limits the airflow even more. And that air flows down here, and when you're lighting, it will mix with the fuel, and that will prevent the stove from flooding on light up. What happens then is once the generator is hot, you open the valve and it's running like it should, you don't have to worry about it flooding, then you open the valve all the way, which retracts the air wire from this hole down here, at which point now you'll have free-flowing fuel in here, and of course the fuel is going to seek the same level that it's got in the tank and all of that, and that will cut off as the fuel level rises. It will cut off the air supply here, so that's why you don't lose all the air out of it. So that's our tank and manifold disassembly. Back to the rest of this. Coleman didn't really design anything else in here to be taken apart, but to make it easier to paint the oven components in particular, I am going to try to remove the pins that go through all of these hinges. To do that, you use a little metal nail setter punch and a hammer, and you just drive them out. There's a sequence that they need to be taken out in, and I'm hoping that these channels aren't filled with sand, because if they are, it probably isn't going to come apart. I don't feel anything particularly gritty, so I think we're good. I'm not going to film that part because you don't want to watch me, and especially you don't want to listen to me pounding with a hammer and a punch on metal. For the grate also, I'll have to bend these tabs out just a bit and I can work the grate out. But separating the bottom from the lid isn't going to happen because you can't remove this wire. This wire is like on all of the early stoves. It goes all the way around the perimeter, and it's what holds everything together. So to get that out, you'd have to unroll all of this stuff. So what I will do here, I need to drill out these rivets. Here we are with our brass parts on the left and our steel parts on the right simmering away. This is a citric acid solution to remove corrosion, tarnish, rust, you name it. It pretty much gets rid of everything. About 1 teaspoon per liter of water. And I will let all of this simmer away, the brass for about 20 minutes and the steel probably for a good hour. I'll remove the nickel plated parts sooner than that, but the burner caps and all that will stay in here for a while. All right, we've got parts coming out of the citric acid, so I'm going to rinse them with water to get any remaining citric acid off, and I'm going to rub them down with steel wool. This is some 4-aught.
see the tank in my e-tank, and it is definitely bubbling away. Hopefully it'll strip both layers of paint off, and it will also deal with any rust. So I'll probably leave this in here the rest of the day and come back and check on it. I will have to flip it over, obviously, since it doesn't quite fit. Been a few hours, so out comes our tank. You can see this wasn't really rusty, but it did strip the paint off very thoroughly. And with the tank out, in go our legs and the tank bracket. E-tank is getting pretty murky, but it works nevertheless, so in goes the manifold. I expect I will have to flip this, maybe not. And I'll leave that in there the rest of the day. Let's put this tank bracket back on. At least it's really clear how it goes on. I think this was held on by old grease and paint, and I can see why there's a bit of a problem because it doesn't actually, I tried my clamp on this, and depending on where you clamp, if you clamp it here, this end pops up, so they didn't get a good solid fit on this to begin with, but we're going to use some JB Weld and put this back together. Okay. I think that should be good. Fill the gap a bit more than the original soldering did, I think. Yeah, it's squishing out a little bit there, which is kind of what I want. And I figured out clamping this down here is the best spot. Not sure this will work, but we'll try. Maybe I can get it just barely. Oh, there we go. Okay. A little complex there. Trying not to dent the tank, but yeah, we've got the JB Weld squishing out all around, at least on one side. So I think that'll be a better bond than it had originally. I'm done with the sanding. I've wiped everything down with acetone. Everything feels pretty smooth, and it may not have been necessary, but I'm hoping that just helps with the primer coat. I will wet sand after the primer as well. I'm just using some basic gray Rust-Oleum primer, and I will spray at least 2 coats, probably 3, depending on how thick it goes on. A nice paint job is all in the prep work. So we've got this primed. Now I'm going to wet sand it. You can kind of hear as I rub my hand across it, it's not entirely smooth. So what I'm going to do is sand this, wet sand it rather, with some 1000 grit sandpaper. Anything 600 to 1000 grit will be fine. 1000 is probably on the fine side, but I find it's a little less aggressive. The idea is just to wet sand it until you can run your hand across it and it's nice and smooth, as opposed to having this drag. So get plenty of water going here and just start working in sections. And you'll feel it smooth out, and if you feel it hanging anywhere, just sand that a little bit more. Time for the color coat. I'm using this Rust-Oleum Kona Brown. I've used it in the past. It seems to be a pretty decent match for Coleman's 1930s sort of reddish brown. Our last bit of painting is with the stencil on the tank. They had stenciling on them that said Coleman, made in USA. I've, from photos, managed to estimate the size and placement. It's probably not perfect, but I think it's pretty close to the original. I'm going to spray it with this Rust-Oleum metallic gold paint. This is so far the only gold paint that I've had any success with. I've tried some other Rust-Oleum that I figured out later was more of like an indoor paint or craft paint, and it bleeds underneath vinyl stickers and made a mess, and also it's not gasoline resistant in the slightest. This seems to do pretty well. Also, this stuff sets up in just about the right amount of time so that you can peel the stencil off. I've also tried Duplicolor, Color Match Gold or whatever they call it, automotive paint, which I thought would be sturdier, and I never had any success getting it to actually stay in here on the tank after I peeled the vinyl off. The whole thing would just peel off all at once. So I'm going to use this. I'm using a vinyl stencil. I created this artwork on my computer, and then I emailed it to my wife, and she did the magic with her Cricut. It cuts things like vinyl stencils and lots of other things. Think of a printer, but with a very, very precise X-Acto knife type blade inside of it. I can't really tell you much about how it works. That's her thing, but I have applied that. I need to mask everything off, and then we'll paint it. Okay, we're masked up. I've shaken the can. This stuff dries really, really quickly. So
The first thing, just to get something that the thicker paint will stick to, I'm going to give it a light dusting and then wait about 15 to 20 seconds, and then I will spray the whole thing more thoroughly. So I'm going to give that about a 15 count. And now and that should be good. Now it needs to come off right away, so my experience has been about the time it takes to remove all the masking is about the amount of time it needs to set up, and no more. I'm going to peel it up. At a fairly steep angle. All right, and if you've got, this is my wife's weeding tool. It's always possible that part of it may stick. Tweezers also help there. And it looks like as I peeled it off, I touched here and here, so I can fill those in with a toothpick while it's still wet here. So I won't film that part, but I'll just spray some paint on my paper and use a toothpick and just carefully fill those in. We're ready to put everything back together. I'm going to start with a case and work my way from the bottom up. So we'll start with our legs, and I think these donor nickel-plated legs came out pretty well once I cleaned the paint off. The bottoms aren't so hot, but the parts we'll see here and here actually look pretty good considering they're more than 90 years old. I thought about pop rivets, but I ended up settling on these Chicago screws. They're a 1/4-inch Chicago screws, or post screws as they seem to like to call them here, which is slightly too long. I was going to trim them down, but then I was testing them for size and realized that if I use these little nylon spacers or washers, if I put them on the outside, it will take up the slack while also preventing the legs from scratching my fresh paint. And that's one of the annoying things on these stove restorations is when the legs scratch the paint, and they'll probably scratch paint up here and all that, but hey, I can save this. So that's what we're going to do first. So let me open this guy up. Direction. So I'm just going to put this on here. We've got these, I don't know what to call these. They're little squares of metal, sheet metal, and what they do is reinforce the case so that it doesn't get pulled in. There, get our spacer. Looks like I need to do the back at the same time. See what I'm doing back here. That popped everything back out. There we go. me do a repeat of that on the other side. All right, there's the legs. Now, let's put our grate back in. So this is, again, from the donor. It's not perfect, but it's, I think, better than the one that was sandblasted and then half rusted. So we'll just push this in. And pinch our clips closed again. There's our grate. Now for the fun part, and that's putting the oven back together. This is a little bit like a puzzle. We need to make sure that everything goes on the right way, and so I'm going to take it or put it back together the reverse of how it came apart. So we'll put the top on. Get some dust on here. So we'll put the top on. Now what's misleading, all these other panels have raised portions that face the outside. So it would be tempting to put this raised portion facing up because that's what looks like the finished part. But that's actually not the case. It goes like this, and what would appear to be the raised panel and finished part actually faces downward. But this is necessary because this needs to fold down into the lid. So we'll get one of our rods, and I did off camera, I didn't show it, these came out without too much trouble, which surprised me after the sandblasting. I figured there'd be grit in there. But just to make sure they go back in easily, I've wet sanded all of these with 400 grit sandpaper. So this is going to go back in from this side because that's where I had to bend this out just a little bit to make room for that. Easier said than done. I think maybe we do this. There we go. And we're at the second junction, second barrel. And the third. I'm going to switch sides here. I think we're right here now. Looks like if we just rotate things a little bit, I think we're going to have to tap this in the last bit. Okay, let's try it this way. I apologize if you can't see what I'm doing here. I don't think my punch is going to want to sit on top of that. It's fairly rounded, but let's see. Huh? All right, we're in. Let's get the rest of this done. So this folds nicely. Everything's straight now. It all fits in very nicely. So let's put the front on. I know this is the front because it's got the oven rack bits. Let's get this started. doesn't help. There we go. But believe me, this was totally worth the trouble to get a decent paint job. It made it much easier to paint. Okay, and over here. All the way it should be. A little wobbly here. All right, let me switch sides and we will put this guy on, and it goes this way. Okay, tabs go toward the back. Go ahead and just put those tabs in. Help hold everything together. Okay. All right, now we've got the bottom and the top. So we'll start with the top here. Might actually, I think, be easier to do from the bottom. The other side went in and cleared this corner, but this side does not want to clear that corner. So, I'll do it this way. So, this tab goes on the bottom here. And then this guy goes on the outside. So this should, they overlap, and you want this on the inside and the actual door on the outside. All right. So there's our oven. There. We just need the oven rack to hold it together, but I don't want to mess with that quite yet. And next, we've got our towel rack, and that, I didn't actually pay attention to how that came off, but I think it's got to go this way instead of this way, because this needs to be able to clear all those layers when it's folded up. So we've got one last pin here. Sets the curved in. So this should just slide in nice and easily, and there we go. So let me get that oven rack and we can put this back. This I painted with black barbecue paint quite a while ago and have been using it with several other stoves. Well, this one was in unusable condition. Again, same previous owner sandblasted it, and I painted it with black barbecue paint because it was getting quite rusty. Okay, there we go. Let me put the legs up. And we're ready to get that tank put together, so let's set this aside. All right, here are all our pump components. I've swapped out the pump handle because that other one was broken. This came off of, I think it was a slant lamp, like a 118 or 119 that had a bad pump tube. Unfortunately, the nickel plating has been polished or worn off, but other than that, they used the same pump handle. So, got our cap, our spring. Need one nut on here. Oh, that's the wrong washer. This is our little backer. Got a little spacer to keep it centered. Got a wave washer that goes on there, and then our outer nut. Let's oil this. I'm using 3-in-1 oil. Coleman, the factory, used neat's foot oil, which you can use as well. Anything that's not vegetable oil. I, even on a recent trip, acquired a Model 1 and wanted to get the pump working, and I used oil from the dipstick in my car. This is easier to do if you put the air stem in the pump handle and then feed it in that way, as opposed to trying to get the air stem in there for, we need to put our check valve in first. So the check valve seems to be working just fine. We'll put that in before the pump. We'll just cinch this down. Now we put the pump in, and thread the cap on. And the air stem should thread in. And that's our pump. Let's deal with the fuel cap. All right, we've got the cap, the screw, and the insert. I've also got a new gasket here. Try to throw a link up above to my video on replacing these. The easiest way is to just use a propane torch and burn out the old one. That's particularly easy to do on these old 3-piece fuel caps. Down, and then just thread our screw in. go. Now, let's deal with our valve. All right, we've got our valve components here. Let's put that back together. So we'll start with the fuel pickup. We've got this guy. As far as I can tell, it doesn't matter which end goes which way. So just make sure that's snug. And then it threads into here. And we'll make sure that's snug. And then we've got our pickup filter. And we'll make sure that that is snug. And you'll remember that then goes down into the fount, and we just have to jimmy that around until it goes in. And we want to make sure that it's angling down into the bottom of the tank, like so. And we wiggle it until it gets fully seated down there. And then we'll thread in this guy. I'm not sure what you call this other than some kind of a pickup retainer. And I'm going to use the ratchet to make sure this is tight. Now our valve goes in here, but before I do that, I want to put the manifold on here, and it goes this direction, because I want to use some thread sealant on this valve, and that only lasts for so long before it sets, and we need to make sure that this guy is aligned properly first. So let's see here. This guy. Okay. So we've got this screw. It goes in here and holds these two together. And let's turn this around. So let's put our cap on. And this is not an original screw. So one thing that was missing from this. And we've got our burner caps. Screws. So these guys go on first. Originally, the stoves had brass slotted burner caps, but those had a tendency to get damaged and sort of melt, especially on the auxiliary burners from underburning. So they replaced them with these cast iron toothed burners. And then these would later, a few years after this model, these would become the burners for the economy models when Coleman came out with the band of blue burners, which is what you're used to seeing on modern camp stoves. So that's our burner and manifold assembly. Now, I told you I had a new generator for this guy. So that sits in here. And I was looking at my 9E, and rather than a washer here, it actually has a little piece of metal that's bent to fit over this. I noticed the manifold's actually shaped a little bit differently on that. So it looks like there were maybe two different versions of this manifold, because that little bent piece of sheet metal, I don't think it would work on this one. All right, now we know how we need to align this. So we'll put this on second. Actually, you know what? I think I'm going to need some slack in this. So let's put this in and lock it down when we're done. Let's get some thread sealant just to make sure this doesn't leak, because I'm not sure how tight it's going to be able to get. Whoa, a little bit more than I wanted, but that's okay. That's why the thread sealant, because it needs to be about that angle. But that's not very tight. So now this screws onto the generator. And lines up like that. Okay. Now let's tighten these fittings. Sure that this is that's as tight as it's going to get. And put our knob on. And our instruction disc. All right, and that's our tank and manifold. And I realize sitting here, there is one last thing we need to do. So I want clean hands for this, so I'll move things around again and be back momentarily. These came with a decal. In addition to the stenciling on the stove tank, there was a decal that would sit right here under the handle. So this is a reproduction I made on my computer and had it printed up on some water slide decal paper at a local print shop. So this is all ready to go. I'm going to stick this in the water, and I figured out this water slide decal paper releases very, very, very quickly. All right, I think this is about ready. So I'm going to get this a little bit wet. And this has some fiddly parts on it. Just slide that out. And that's pretty well centered. And I think it's straight. Just work the water out from underneath. All right, and there's our decal. So I think that looks pretty good. The reproduction decals really make the pieces. They're not perfect, but they make it look a little more original. That's everything except to put the tank and the manifold back onto this stove. Just lift this up. Get that through on that side. Get this through on this side. Just drop this on. And that's it. So I just need to gas this up and pump it up, and we'll be able to give this a first fire. Through the magic of video editing, we're gassed up. I've put about 35 strokes of the pump in here, and we're ready to go. So, following the instructions, because this is instant lighting, you'll notice they have a residual preheat cup down here. I guess if you really needed to, you could use that. But we just open this a quarter turn, just like you do on a lantern. And then we open our generator. And it says to let it run for 60 seconds and then to open it wide. I suspect it may settle down sooner than that. There it goes. So now we'll open our main valve all the way, and we can light our secondary burner. These are great running stoves. They're basically the stove equivalent of the L220 and L228 slants, which were always great lanterns. They light very easily. So let me cut the lights out so we can see that flame pattern. Right, there you have it. I like that. It's time to take this out tomorrow and make some lunch at the lake. So, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.